Welcome, executives, consultants, and CMA candidates, to this explainer. Imagine we're stepping right into a graduate-level masterclass in strategic management today. We're going to tackle a core concept that literally separates the textbook theorists from the true executive strategists. It's called strategic environmental analysis. Today, we are mastering both the macro and the micro environments.
Okay, let's dive right into this with a fundamental question that, frankly, should keep every CEO awake at night. How do external forces shape the success or failure of organizations? You see, you could have the absolute most brilliant, meticulously crafted strategy sitting there in the boardroom, but if you misunderstand your competitive ecosystem, well, that strategy is going to fail. Organizations just don't operate in a vacuum, right? Your success depends entirely on how well you align your internal capabilities with these constantly shifting external conditions.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the business environment as a whole. Then, we break it down into the macro environment and the micro environment. After that, we'll run through some scenario case studies. And finally, we'll wrap up with the consultant's mindset.
So, let's kick things off with Section 1, the business environment. Now, this is the absolute first crucial concept you need to internalize, especially if you're sitting for the CSCA exam anytime soon. Every single organization operates within two distinct layers of external forces, and distinguishing between them is heavily tested. On one side, you've got the macro environment. These are broad, economy-wide forces that are notoriously difficult to influence. They basically affect all organizations. On the other side, we have the microenvironment. These are your direct, firm-specific stakeholders, and crucially, they are partially manageable. So here's a quick practical memory shortcut for you. If it's broad and indirect, it's macro. If it's a direct stakeholder, it's micro.
Moving right along to Section 2, the macro environment.
Let's start with the zoomed-out perspective here. By definition, the macro environment consists of these massive, broad external forces operating at local, national, regional, and global levels. I mean, they affect everyone. But here is the major executive takeaway. Managers generally cannot control these forces. You can't just command a global financial crisis to stop or force currency exchange rates to bend to your will, right? The executive response here is always about adaptation, never control.
You know, the examiner rarely asks for textbook definitions. They want to know the strategic implications. So let's actually walk through these factors. GDP growth signals more consumer spending, right? So you expand. High interest rates mean borrowing is more expensive, so you might want to delay a massive investment. Inflation? Well, that just puts immediate pressure on your profit margins. Capital availability allows you to acquire competitors or fund innovation. High unemployment might actually make recruitment a bit easier, but it reduces overall consumer spending. Energy prices pretty much dictate your production and logistics costs. Currency markets swing your export competitiveness, and the global financial system connects this whole shebang. So think of Disney trying to manage shifting global energy prices for its theme parks, or Coca-Cola analyzing global GDP to forecast beverage sales, or Apple dealing with sudden currency swings that impact its international revenue. As a strategist, you absolutely must anticipate how a shift in any of these broad forces requires a strategic pivot.
And that brings us to a classic exam trap. Whenever you're presented with a macroeconomic factor, I want you to ask yourself this executive-level question. Can management actually influence this factor? If the answer is no, then it's macro. You can't negotiate with inflation. There's no way you can lobby the entire global financial system. You just have to strategically adapt. Recognizing the specific boundary of control is absolutely essential, both for the CSCA exam and for actual corporate leadership out in the wild.
All right, zooming in now. Section 3, the microenvironment.
Let's look closely at what we call the task environment. The key components here are the actual players on your immediate chessboard. We're talking about your suppliers, buyers, consumers, competitors, complementors, and regulators. Now, unlike those big macro forces we just talked about, firms actually have varying degrees of power to influence these specific relationships. You can form strategic alliances, you can negotiate contracts, or you can launch aggressive marketing campaigns to sway them.
And this brilliantly illustrates how each of these stakeholders directly impacts your competitiveness. Just look at suppliers. They totally dictate your input costs and quality. Think of Tesla actively managing its lithium suppliers. Competitors, on the other hand, force you to defend your market share and drive innovation, like Amazon battling Microsoft in cloud computing. Regulators, they dictate your compliance costs and the rules of your industry. Complementors are actually super fascinating. Think of app developers for the iPhone. They inherently enhance the value of Apple's entire ecosystem. And consumers, well, they dictate your brand perception and actual demand. Every single one of these stakeholders pulls a very direct lever on your operational performance.
So here's the bottom line. While the macro environment forces you to adapt, the microenvironment empowers you to act. Management can negotiate with suppliers. They can innovate past their competitors. They can reposition products for changing consumer tastes. You have real agency here. That is the fundamental difference you need to remember. Let's put this into practice with Section 4, Scenario Case Studies. We're going to run through some rapid-fire scenarios to test those executive instincts of yours. You could face a tech firm dealing with global silicon shortages, a retailer navigating a new economy-wide import tariff, or a pharmaceutical company adjusting to strict new FDA rules. But let's actually deeply examine an airline, say Qatar Airways or Delta. Rapid fire, they are facing 4 simultaneous developments. 1, global oil prices increase sharply. 2, national inflation rises. 3, a key aircraft supplier delays their deliveries. And 4, new environmental regulations are introduced across their flight paths. As an executive sitting at the table, you need to categorize these shifting winds immediately. So what do you think? Which forces are macro and which are micro? Let's reveal the answers. Those oil prices, the inflation, and those broad new environmental regulations, those are classic macroeconomic forces. The airline cannot control global oil markets or broad economic inflation, right? They just have to adapt their ticket pricing and fuel hedging strategies. But development number 3, that key supplier delaying deliveries, that is entirely a microenvironmental issue. Management can pick up the phone, negotiate, invoke penalty clauses, or seek out alternative leasing arrangements. Let's try another mini case study. Welcome to the Netflix Strategy Sandbox. Imagine you are the CEO of Netflix. You're staring down rising inflation, increasing national unemployment, reduced discretionary spending from your subscribers, and, to top it all off, a slew of new competitor streaming services launching this very quarter. Notice how we are layering unavoidable macroeconomic headwinds right on top of direct microeconomic threats. The most important question isn't just about identifying the forces, it's asking, well, how should our strategy actually change? Rising inflation and unemployment are macro. You can't fix the economy yourself. But you can recognize that consumers suddenly have reduced discretionary spending. So, to fight the micro threat of these new competitors, how do you adapt? Maybe you introduce a lower-cost ad-supported tier. Maybe you cut some of those bloated production budgets to protect your profit margins. You take the uncontrollable macro data and use it to execute a highly controllable micro strategy. That, my friends, is true executive-level thinking.
And that leads us perfectly into Section 5, the consultant's mindset.
Let's talk about the exam for a second. Here are the 5 concepts most likely to be tested on the CSCA exam through some pretty tricky scenarios. Concept 1, differentiating adaptation versus control. Concept 2, correctly identifying competitors as micro, not macro forces. Remember, they are direct and specific. Concept 3, recognizing that management cannot control inflation or GDP. Those macro factors must be managed around. Concept 4, treating regulators as external micro-stakeholders, not internal ones. And Concept 5, assessing capital availability as a macroeconomic constraint on your micro-expansion plans. If you can spot these tested scenarios, you are already way ahead of the curve. Before we wrap this up, let's do 5 rapid-fire review questions. What forces could you absolutely not control? What exactly is the task environment? Who are your complementers? How does inflation act on your business? And what is the golden rule? Well, the answers to these form our 10 most important takeaways for today. 1, macro is broad. 2, micro is direct. 3, you adapt to macro. 4, you negotiate micro. 5, GDP signals expansion. 6, inflation squeezes your margins. 7, competitors drive innovation. 8, suppliers control your inputs. 9, complementers build ecosystems. And 10, you must constantly ask who is affected and how you pivot. Great consultants don't just ask what is happening out there. They ask why it's happening and exactly how to adapt to it. To finish up, I want to leave you with 3 executive reflection questions for your own boardroom. Number 1, are you currently confusing uncontrollable macro noise with actionable micro strategy? Number 2, just how vulnerable is your supply chain to the next big global macro shift? And number 3, which micro stakeholder requires immediate renegotiation from you today? Mastering this macro-micro distinction isn't just about passing a certification exam. It's about ensuring your organization actually survives and thrives in the real world. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Go out there and keep thinking strategically.